Welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Amanda Lang. Coming up on the show, as the premiers meet the Prime Minister, will the atmosphere of urgency continue in Canada? And consumers are on the ropes. Will there be any relief ahead? Plus, how Canada fights a trade war might help change how Canada thinks of itself. That's all ahead. First, for the week that was in business, it's time for the briefs. Canada's premiers met with Indigenous leaders and Prime Minister Carney this week, with talk aimed at keeping momentum going on big projects inside the country. Saskatchewan joined Ontario and Alberta in an agreement to build energy and trade infrastructure. The premiers are pressing for more control over immigration to their provinces to help meet labor requirements. The U.S. and Japan announced a trade deal that will set a 15% tariff on Japanese goods, including autos. Japan is committing to a $550 billion investment in the U.S. The tariff rate is notable. It's lower than the current rates being imposed, but also higher than the 10% negotiated with the U.K. Canada-U.S. talks continue. If there's good news in the Bank of Canada's recent survey of business, it's that while still downbeat, companies are less worried than they were before about the effects of tariffs. Still, caution is the name of the game, and that's keeping hiring and investment in check. Stellantis and GM both detailed the costs of U.S. tariffs on their businesses, and the numbers are big. Stellantis reported a preliminary net loss of $2.7 billion for the first half of the year, thanks to tariffs in the U.S. after it cut production and had to pay penalties as a result. Meanwhile, General Motors said tariffs will shave $1 billion off its profit in the most recent quarter and thinks the impact could get worse next quarter. The sale of U.S.-made booze dropped by 2/3 after many provinces stopped carrying imported liquor. Sales of Canadian spirits have also fallen, suggesting some customers are not switching to homegrown brands. This week, the U.S. ambassador to Canada said the Buy Canadian attitudes afoot in this country are perceived as mean and nasty by the U.S. administration. And those are your business briefs. The meeting this week of provincial and territorial leaders and the Prime Minister included talk aimed at staying cooperative and getting things done. The question is, will the consensus end once projects actually get chosen? Perrin Beatty is co-chair of the expert panel on Canada-U.S. relations and, of course, a former CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Perrin, great to have you with us.
Great to be with you, Amanda.
So there is a new tone afoot in this country, and I guess I'm curious from your point of view of whether you think it will hold as we start to get to the nitty-gritty of projects, picking which provinces will be the recipients of these big Canada-building projects.
It certainly needs to hold. Whether it will or not, we'll see as things go on. But it's encouraging to see that there's the degree of unity that we're seeing in Canada today and a sense of shared purpose. It's much greater than I can remember for a long, long time.
And in terms of those projects, obviously there are the big things we can imagine: energy projects, mine projects, some infrastructure. But this is a big economy, Perrin, with many moving parts. When you were head of the Canadian Chamber, of course, you represented a lot of businesses who wouldn't necessarily be affected by those, and it would take a long time for the benefits of those to trickle down. Are we at risk of focusing on some big ticket items in favor at the expense of a lot of other smaller, kind of maybe more mundane parts of our economy, but equally important?
It can't be a case of either or. We've got to focus on the economy in the broadest sense. So yes, we do have to unstick the process for these major projects that we haven't been able to move in the past. But we also have to address the needs of various sectors of the economy, including small business. We're under siege in a way that we haven't seen for a long, long time, and it's going to require that the government respond in a very effective way right across the board.
We got some, I guess, a reality check from the Prime Minister on both the level of potential tariffs and the path to a trade deal by this kind of arbitrary August 1st deadline. And I was curious for your thoughts on that. We may take longer to get there, and when we get there, it may not be as good as we hoped.
Well, I think what the Prime Minister is doing is to manage expectations, and I think it's very important that he do so. Not surprisingly, as we got into the negotiations and people said, "What are you looking for?" His answer was, "We want to get rid of the tariffs, period." But every single deal that we've seen that Donald Trump has done with any country has left tariffs in place at one level or another. And that's inevitably what we're looking at as well here. How long will it take? We don't know. We saw a deal happen almost overnight with Japan in the last couple of days. It didn't look as if it was going anywhere, and then all of a sudden the logjam broke. We're seeing progress now with regard to Europe. We don't know what that means for Canada, and the government needs to take whatever time is necessary to get a deal that's acceptable. No deal is better than a bad deal.
Well, that's an interesting question there, because some level of tariff, let's say it's 10%, Perrin, presumably getting clarity is what business needs. But are you saying however long it takes to get to that clarity is worth taking the time?
Both of all, first of all, clarity, yes, but also a level of tariffs or a level of measures which don't unduly penalize Canada. We've got a series of problems here in that we've been hit not only with a general level of tariffs higher than he was threatening to apply to other countries, but also specific tariffs on individual commodities such as steel, aluminum, copper, potentially lumber as well. And we also have things like the fentanyl tariffs. And then in addition to that, he's talking about the renegotiation of CUSMA. So this is extremely complex with a large number of moving parts. And we've got to make sure that it is both as timely as possible and that it is something that's acceptable to Canada at the end of the day.
Perrin, so good to have you. Appreciate your time today.
Anytime.
Perrin Beatty, co-chair of the expert panel on Canada-U.S. relations, former CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Coming up, how will consumers manage if there's no relief ahead on interest rates? Stay with us. Welcome back. With little sign of interest rates coming down in Canada, how are consumers holding up? Here's a look by the numbers. Consumer debt continued to grow, hitting a record $2.5 trillion, held by 32 million Canadians at the end of last year. That's up 4.5% year over year, according to TransUnion. Credit card balances jumped 9.2%. Younger Canadians are the fastest growing segment for debt holders, a 29% increase in participation for Gen Z alone. Average credit card debt per borrower was $4,681 at the end of last year, and delinquency rates are also up 1.8% to a 5-year high, with Gen Z helping drive those numbers higher too. Meanwhile, 60% of mortgages will renew this year or next, and many will see higher rates, especially those with fixed-rate 5-year mortgages. The Bank of Canada says the average monthly payment could climb 10% for renewals in 2025 and 6% for those renewing in 2026. But that masks a big difference in mortgage type. Fixed mortgage holders could see increases of up to 20% compared with a December 2024 payment. Those with variable rate mortgages could actually see declines of 5 to 7%. Those rising mortgage rates are also making it harder for many to buy a home. RateHub says affordability worsened in 12 of 13 major markets. Only Toronto saw an improvement in affordability in June. Most mortgage holders, of course, will face an increase in costs in the coming years. So what is the ripple effect of those jumps? Penelope Graham is head of content at ratehub.ca. Penelope, thanks for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So it's not going to be news to people that hold these mortgages. If you took a mortgage out in 20 or 21, rates were very low. And you will know that you're probably facing a reset at a higher level, in some cases much higher. But just put it into context for us of how big a hit to the system it is when we see that big a jump in payments for so many people.
So this phenomenon that we refer to as the mortgage renewal cliff or wall, it really started to become a concern in the latter half of 2022 and throughout 2023, because of course interest rates started to rise exponentially from those record lows during the pandemic, and many Canadians had taken out their mortgages at that time for next to nothing. Fast forward to today, and all of those 5-year fixed terms are now coming up for renewal. Bank of Canada has come out with that analysis that 60% of those who are renewing this year and next are going to face higher payments. So RateHub did some additional calculations to see how these payments are going to differ compared to the lowest rate you would have taken out in 2020 versus today. And what we found is if you took out a fixed rate mortgage in 2020, you would have had an option to take out a rate at 1.89%. Well, today, the lowest rate you could take out is 200 basis points higher. It's now up to 3.89%. And what that translates into is actually a 19% increase in your monthly mortgage payment. And from a dollar perspective, you're looking at paying $436 more per month on your mortgage. And that equals out to just over $5,200 a year. That is not an insignificant shock for many households to absorb.
It is
on
not.
The variable mortgage.
Sorry, I just want to jump in and say it's not the change, of course, is not insignificant. However, a lot of people would have seen it coming and, of course, hopefully understood when they took mortgages out below 2% that they were getting the deal of a lifetime. Do you think that people have adjusted their spending, their savings, their household income in order to account for the fact that those costs are going to go up?
Well, we have had a couple years of leeway, understanding that rates are going to be in a much higher interest rate environment this year and next. The most important thing you can do as a renewing borrower, if you know that your monthly payments are going to be higher, is to be proactive. And that means taking initiative, 6 months out from your renewal date to start exploring your options. Because if you can secure a slightly lower mortgage rate, even just shaving a few basis points off can equal hundreds or even thousands of dollars saved on your mortgage. So what that looks like, connecting with a mortgage broker, exploring your options potentially with other lenders. Are they offering a more competitive interest rate than what you might be receiving from your existing lender?
Right.
It's common knowledge that they save the most competitive rates for new clients. Taking out things like a rate hold or a pre-approval to guarantee access to today's pricing, because we are starting to see evidence that both fixed and variable mortgage rates could be poised to rise in the coming months or stay stagnant. We're certainly have left behind the most recent rate cutting cycle from the Bank of Canada. So right. Borrowers need to be mentally prepared for interest rates to not offer much relief.
And I do want to ask what happens for those who are looking maybe to even check in with a broker, a change mortgage provider, if the value of their home has come down, as it has in many cases, Penelope. What happens if your mortgage is getting more expensive, but the value of your home is coming down? Does that have an immediate impact on people looking to renew?
Certainly. So that presents what we call appraisal risk. And if you're underwater on your mortgage, if you now actually owe more in terms of what the home is worth, that can certainly complicate your mortgage renewal. The best piece of advice is to communicate early with your lender about what your options are if you're truly at risk of default. They're going to work with you. It is in their best interest for you to not default on your payments or have to foreclose on your home. And there are certainly options that you can explore, such as extending your mortgage amortization. This will in turn shrink your monthly payments, perhaps to something that's more manageable. Therefore, you're more liquid month to month with the budget. But the trade-off there is more interest paid over the lifetime of your mortgage. But the takeaway here is to communicate about this early with your lender.
So good to have you, Penelope. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Penelope Graham is head of content at ratehub.ca. Well, it's a bad time for a recession with costs still high and rates likely to stay put, at least for now. Is that a perfect storm for people in debt? Wesley Cowan is a senior VP at MNP. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So let's just start with whether things do feel a little bit shaky for people who might have been hoping for relief in terms of the rates that is maybe not going to come now, certainly not through the fall.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. I mean, rates are going to stay, would seem to be consistent now for a while. And, for a lot of Canadians, about 2/3 of Canadians say that they still would want rates to go down. They're still somewhat desperate for that to happen. So there's still, even though rates have come down compared to what they were a year or so ago, a lot of Canadians feel that it could be even lower, and that would help a lot.
We've definitely been talking here about the rising costs for a lot of mortgage holders, especially those with fixed rate mortgages. What are you watching in terms of kind of your client base, but also potential client base, for signs of trouble? Where does it tend to show up first?
Yeah, and this is an area we are watching fairly carefully, because there are a lot of folks that bought houses or remortgaged during the pandemic. A lot of those mortgages are coming up for renewal soon. And, even though interest rates have relaxed a bit compared to what they were, they're still considerably higher than what people originally got their mortgages at. And so that could mean a fairly substantial monthly increase in their mortgage payment. And that's going to put a strain on their financial affairs, on their budget, and their ability to pay other debts. And so that's where things could sort of start to slide a bit, and we're looking at that pretty carefully.
And as I understand it, credit cards is usually one place we let slide first, even though it's the most expensive thing. It's the worst thing to do. But of course, we pay off our mortgage before everything else as a rule. Have we seen credit card insolvency rising?
Well, it's one of the things that's happened for a lot of folks is that, if they don't have the ability to extract equity out of their house, out of their property, they'll turn to unsecured credit a lot of times with credit cards because they are easy to use. And, it's easy to sort of let that get away sometimes. And so, making up the difference in income, or maybe if there were expenses that you didn't anticipate you were going to have, using credit cards. And as you point out, credit card interest is typically very high. And if you're only making the minimum payment, you're not going to be able to pay the balance down very quickly.
In the mix of all of this, of course, is this fear about this recession. Even a mild one could put some jobs at risk. We know people are afraid for their jobs right now in a sort of a new way. How closely do you watch the labor market for signs that will turn into folks that really can't manage their debt?
Sure, it's a fairly significant thing, and certainly in our most recent M&P Consumer Debt Index, the quarterly Ipsos survey that we do with folks, they're talking about some of the concerns that they have around this and the possibility of, layoffs or losing their jobs, particularly given the backdrop of global volatility with what's happening with the U.S. administration and some of the pressures there. Really, it comes down to just this sense of uncertainty about what's going to lie ahead.
And just really quickly here, would you expect things to get worse for debtors in the months ahead, or are we seeing things slightly improve?
Well, it's interesting. It's kind of a mix right now. A lot of folks are reporting that they are still concerned about their financial position. About a third of Canadian respondents in our survey said that they were anxious or stressed about their financial situation. But, there was also some optimism. About a third of the people responded to say that they expect their debt situation could improve within a year. And about 40% felt it would improve within 5 years. So there is some optimism there. It's not all doom and gloom. So it's a bit of a balance right now between those things.
So good to have you for this, Wesley. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much.
Wesley Cowan is a senior VP at MNP. Coming up, a risk expert weighs in on the challenges ahead for Canada. That's still ahead. But first, leave it to Elon Musk to push the frontiers of anxiety around AI by announcing a child-friendly version of his own AI, Grock. He unleashed a torrent of fear about children being exposed to this technology. Grock is Elon's effort to keep up with the Joneses of AI, but has more limited data sets for training and primarily relies on content from Twitter X. In other words, a lot of trash, just what you want to feed your small children. The internet reacted the way you'd expect it to, which has us wondering if Kinder Grock is more publicity stunt than genuine offering, or in the vernacular of the medium, rage bait. We're back after this. Welcome back. This week on the Wonk podcast, I spoke to Ian Bremmer, founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media. We talked about the Canada-U.S. trade fight, and he had some provocative things to say about how Canada might be its own adversary when it comes to a united front, but that he doesn't think it should be called an existential crisis.
I have not seen any Canadians facing questions of survival on the basis of what Trump has said and done. What he has said and done is overtly antagonistic towards America's closest ally. And it has been, in my view, self-defeating. It's going to hurt both countries in the long term. And it's going to cause a lot more damage to Canada than the U.S., of course, because Canada relies on the U.S. a lot more. And certainly the potential for Canada to enter into recession if they mishandle this is real. It is also true that Canada, since the 80s, has built infrastructure that implies that Canada is not a country. It's all been, you look at these provinces, and there's a lot of power devolved to provinces, and provinces are kind of the deep state in Canada, right? The monopolies that a lot of these capitals have. And if you look at where the pipelines are built, how the supply chain works, how the energy infrastructure works, you wouldn't know that Canada was a country. You'd think, oh, it's all of these like individual relationships with the big, powerful United States. And so the idea that Canada is going to suddenly undo that, with the snap of a finger is clearly, it ain't happening. My point was that when the Americans launch a trade war against Canada, and when they basically say that U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement that you thought was set in stone actually isn't, and we will change it at our whim, that it's very challenging for Canada to react effectively to that because Canada's actual infrastructure has not been built out as if you're one sovereign unit. It's been built out to be dependent on and to take advantage of the fact that you happen to be closest to the most powerful country economically in the world. And that was my point. It doesn't look, your economic policies in building out strategic infrastructure has not been that of a sovereign. And I think that's a really important point.
I asked Bremer about the risk AI poses. Here's what he had to say about that.
The thing about AI is I've never in my career experienced an issue where the people that are inside it have such a radically different near-term worldview from everybody else. So I think it really does behoove everyone out there to spend a lot more time getting up to speed on how fast this is moving, what it means, its impact on society, how much it's changing.
That was Ian Bremer, founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media, on this week's episode of the Wonk podcast, which you can find anywhere you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Time for the takeaway and the dynamics of bad behavior. Delta Airlines made headlines this week on news that it's using artificial intelligence to help implement dynamic pricing. That's a fancy name for offering a different price for each customer. In some ways, dynamic pricing is as old as commerce itself. Buy the fruit early in the week when it's fresh, and you'll pay more than you do days later when it's near rotten. Airlines have been dynamically pricing for a while based on when you book, and flyers have come to understand that if you plan ahead, you get a better deal. But what about when two customers book on the same day, but one is charged more than the other? That also happens all the time. Throw in a little AI into the mix, though, and the possibilities for personalized pricing rise fast. Suddenly, the algorithm may know where you live and infer how wealthy you are, and therefore how price conscious. It certainly knows if you hesitated or declined to make a purchase of a similar size recently, and it may even know if you have to take the trip or not. Will an airline ticket to a funeral suddenly become radically more expensive because the airline knows the flyer will pay any price? The arguments for dynamic pricing go something like, it improves efficiency, so when something's in high demand, it rises in price in real time, thereby reducing overconsumption. That allocates resources to the ones who value them the most. There's a case to be made that charging more when demand is high actually allows a business to keep costs lower at other times. But the risks of advanced dynamic pricing, when so much could be known about the customer, are many. Sophisticated software will know the age, gender, and even the race of the purchaser. Could that be used to discriminate, even unintentionally? Meanwhile, businesses like Delta run the risk of eroding the trust of their customers if there isn't at least the perception of a fair price. So while dynamic pricing is here, smart businesses will be as open as possible about how and when they use it. My takeaway? In a new world where technology drives efficiency, transparency may be the most valuable currency, because what you don't know is probably hurting you already. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.